The people who are supposed to love you the most can hurt you in ways that strangers never could.
I know that now.
But 10 years ago, sitting alone at my own mother's birthday dinner while my brother made a toast that didn't include my name, not even once, I didn't have words for what was happening to me. I just sat there and smiled and poured myself another glass of water. That was me. Always quiet. Always smiling. Always invisible. Until the day my name appeared on the side of a building in letters 6 feet tall. And suddenly, everyone remembered I existed. Let me take you back to the beginning, because if I start at the end, you won't believe it. And I need you to believe it, because every single word of this is true. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm the second son in a family of 4 kids, me, my older brother Garrett, my younger sister Priya, and the baby Colt. My parents are Richard and Sylvia Marsh. My dad built a moderately successful regional contracting business in our hometown of Linden Falls, Ohio. Nothing massive, about 40 employees at its peak. Enough to keep us comfortable, but not enough for anyone to feel truly secure. That insecurity, I think, is where everything started. My parents always had favorites. I'm not saying that to get sympathy. I'm saying it as a fact, the same way I'd say the sky is blue. Garrett was the oldest and the most charming. He had my dad's handshake and my mom's smile, and he knew how to walk into a room and make people feel like they'd been waiting for him. Colt was the baby, so he got away with everything. Priya was the only girl, so she was my mom's project. And then there was me. I was the quiet one. The one who read books instead of going to parties. The one who got good grades without making a show of it. The one who sat at the dinner table listening while everyone else talked over each other. I didn't fight for attention. I figured eventually people would notice. They didn't. I got into Ohio State on a partial scholarship. My parents threw Garrett a party when he got into a state school with a 2.8 GPA. When I told them about my scholarship, my dad said, "Good. That means we can put more toward Garrett's tuition." He wasn't being cruel. He just didn't think to filter it. That's what I mean when I say I was invisible. I wasn't hated. I was just not considered. Like furniture that's been in the house so long you stop seeing it. I studied biochemistry. Then I studied medicine. I worked nights at a grocery store, weekends at a research lab cleaning equipment, summers doing anything that paid. My parents helped Garrett buy his first car. I took the bus for 4 years. Nobody asked.
I didn't complain.
I just worked. Here's the part that still makes me pause when I think about it. During my second year of medical school, my dad had a mild heart attack. Nothing fatal, but scary enough to put him in the hospital for 5 days. I drove 4 hours to be there. I sat with my mom in the waiting room. I talked to his doctors, translated the medical language into plain English for my family, made sure they understood the treatment plan, asked the right questions. You know who my dad talked to when he woke up?
Garrett.
Garrett, who had driven up the next morning and hadn't read a single word about cardiac care in his life. But he walked in with a bag of my dad's favorite cookies from that bakery on Elm Street, and he sat on the edge of the bed and made my dad laugh, and that was the whole visit. When my dad got discharged, he hugged Garrett in the parking lot. He patted me on the shoulder, like I was a coworker who'd shown up for a meeting. I drove 4 hours home that night thinking, am I doing something wrong? Is there a version of me that would make them see me differently? I couldn't figure it out, so I just kept going. I finished medical school, then a residency in cardiothoracic surgery, one of the most competitive specialties you can pursue. I matched at a top program in Cleveland, which is maybe 45 minutes from Linden Falls. I called my mom to tell her. She said, "Oh, that's nice, honey. Can I call you back? Garrett's on the other line." I stood in my tiny apartment kitchen holding my phone for a long time after that call ended. I want to be clear about something. I'm not telling you this to paint my mother as a monster. She wasn't. She's just someone who had a limited amount of emotional attention to give, and she gave most of it to the people who asked for it loudest. I was never loud, so she never really gave me much. What I am telling you is that what came next, what my family eventually did, didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the product of 10 years of them simply not seeing me as a full person. And when you stop seeing someone as a full person, it becomes very easy to use them. That's when things shifted from neglect to something else entirely. During my residency, Garrett's contracting business, He'd taken over for my dad by then, started struggling. I didn't know the details at the time. I just knew that Garrett called me for the first time in 2 years, and he wanted to meet for dinner. I was cautiously hopeful, if I'm honest. We met at this Italian place near the hospital. Garrett looked good, as always. He's one of those guys who can look polished even when things are falling apart. He asked me about residency for maybe 7 minutes before he got to the real reason he called. He needed money. $50,000. He said it was to save the business, to keep Dad's legacy alive, to make sure the family didn't lose everything. He said he'd pay me back within 18 months. He had a plan. He always had a plan. I should have said no. I said yes. I'd been saving aggressively for years. I had almost no expenses compared to most residents because I was still eating like a grad student and living in a studio apartment the size of a walk-in closet. I had just over $80,000 in savings. I transferred $50,000 to Garrett 2 weeks later. He never paid it back. And here's the part that really stayed with me. When I asked about it 9 months later, he acted like I was being petty, like I was bringing up something embarrassing that we'd all agreed to forget. He said, "Danny, I told you this was going to take time." And when I pushed back, he called my mom and told her I was being aggressive and threatening him over money.
My mom called me.
She didn't ask what happened. She just told me that family doesn't talk to each other the way Garrett said I talked to him, and that I needed to apologize. I apologized. I don't know why I did that. Habit, I think. After my residency, I had a choice to make. I had been offered 2 positions. One was a staff surgeon role at the Cleveland hospital where I trained. Good money, good team, good reputation. The other was a research plus clinical position at a small but well-funded medical center called Whitmore General, about 20 miles outside Linden Falls. Whitmore was interesting for reasons I couldn't fully explain at the time. They had a new cardiothoracic unit that was underfunded and understaffed. The director was a woman named Dr. Cecile Okafor, and she'd called me personally after reading my research publications. She said she was building something and she wanted people who were serious. I took the Whitmore position. My family thought I was crazy. Garrett told me I was throwing away a career at a real hospital to go work at some county clinic. My dad shrugged and said it was my choice. My mom asked if the Cleveland hospital had better parking. None of them asked why I made the choice I made. None of them knew what I knew. And what I knew was this. Dr. Okafor wasn't just building a cardiothoracic unit. She was building a legacy institution. And she'd already been in conversations with the Whitmore Foundation, a private philanthropic organization, about a major capital campaign to expand the hospital significantly. I'd read everything I could find about Whitmore before I accepted that offer. I'd spoken with Dr. Okafor 3 times. And on our 3rd call, she mentioned something that made my heart rate go up in a way that no clinical emergency ever had. She said the foundation was looking for physician investors to participate in the expansion. People with stakes in the mission, not just salaries. I spent 3 months reading every document they'd share with me. I ran numbers. I consulted a financial advisor, a woman named Paula Stringer, who is sharp as a blade and doesn't waste words. And then I made a decision that I told absolutely no one in my family about. I invested. Not everything, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to put my name in the conversation. Life at Whitmore was good in ways I hadn't expected. The work was hard, obviously. Cardiothoracic surgery is always hard, but the team was something special. Dr. Okafor ran the department the way I imagine great football coaches run great teams. High expectations, 0 tolerance for ego, total commitment to results. I thrived in that environment. I also, for the first time in my adult life, started to feel like a person. I had colleagues who remembered my name. A receptionist named Marcus who always saved me the good parking spot even though I told him he didn't have to. A med student I mentored named Renata who sent me a thank you card every year on the anniversary of her first successful procedure under my supervision.
Small things.
But they added up. Meanwhile, back in Linden Falls, my family was going through a rough patch that I was only hearing about secondhand. Garrett's business was still struggling. My dad had started showing early signs of cognitive decline. Nothing alarming yet, but enough to notice. My mom was stressed. And then Colt called me. Colt, who I hadn't spoken to in 8 months. He needed $12,000 for a business opportunity that he couldn't fully explain over the phone. He promised it was legitimate. He said the whole family was struggling, and I was the only one doing well, and didn't I feel any responsibility to help? I said I'd think about it. I called Paula, my financial advisor. She said, "Daniel, stop giving your family money." She didn't say it harshly. She said it the way a doctor tells a patient the truth they already know. And I sat with it for a week, and then I called Colt back and said I couldn't help this time.
Colt told me I'd changed.
That success had made me selfish. Then he hung up. I didn't hear from him again for 2 years. About 18 months into my time at Whitmore, Dr. Okafor called me into her office on a Wednesday afternoon. The room felt charged when I walked in. She had papers on her desk that I recognized immediately as foundation documents. She told me the capital campaign had succeeded.
Not just succeeded.
Exceeded its targets by a significant margin. A combination of grants, private donations, and physician investment, including mine, had made possible something that had been in the planning stages for years. A new wing. A dedicated cardiothoracic and cardiac surgery center. 4 new operating suites, a post-surgical recovery unit, a research floor, and a patient education facility. The largest expansion in Whitmore's history. And then she showed me the naming document. Because of the level of my investment and my clinical role and my research contributions, I had been selected, along with one other major donor, to have my name associated with the facility. The Daniel R. Marsh Cardiothoracic Center. I sat in her office for a moment and didn't say anything. She smiled at me. She said, "You've been a quiet force here, Daniel. It's time people knew your name." I drove home that night in total silence. No music, just the sound of the road. I thought about my dad saying, "Good, that means we can put more toward Garrett's tuition." I thought about my mom saying, "Can I call you back? Garrett's on the other line." I thought about Garrett's $50,000 and Colt's phone call. And I thought about something else, too. Something I hadn't told anyone yet. Here's what I need to explain, because this is the part that changes everything. 3 months before the naming announcement, I had received a letter from an attorney's office. The letter was regarding the estate of my paternal grandmother, Edna Marsh, who had passed away 14 years earlier when I was still in college. I remembered my grandmother clearly. She was a small, quiet woman who smelled like lavender and always slipped me $20 when my parents weren't looking. She used to call me her serious one. She once told me that the serious ones always got the last laugh. I had no idea she meant that literally. The letter explained that a secondary trust had been established as part of my grandmother's estate, a trust that my father, as executor, had known about but had never disclosed to me. The trust had been intentionally structured to release to me at a specific trigger point, the moment I achieved board certification in a surgical specialty. My father had known about this trust for 14 years. He had never told me. The trust contained a property. Specifically, a small commercial building in downtown Linden Falls. A building that my grandmother had purchased in the 1970s. A building that, due to the revitalization of that neighborhood over the past decade, was now worth close to $400,000. A building that had been generating rental income for 14 years. Rental income that, per the trust documents, should have been held in escrow for me. It hadn't been. My father, as executor, had been drawing on that rental income for years. I sat at my kitchen table with those documents for 3 hours. I'm a surgeon. I'm trained to stay calm. I'm trained to look at a situation and think clearly before I act. But my hands were shaking, not from anger, from the staggering, specific clarity of finally understanding. They hadn't just ignored me. They had been taking from me, quietly, legally questionably, for 14 years. I called Paula first. She listened without interrupting, which is one of her best qualities. When I finished, she was silent for a moment, and then she said, "Daniel, you need an estate attorney. Not financial advice. An attorney." Asked her if she knew anyone. She gave me 2 names. I called both that same night. The first had a voicemail. The second, a woman named Catherine Voss, picked up on the 3rd ring even though it was past 7 o'clock. I liked her immediately. I sent Catherine the documents. She called me back the next morning. She told me what I already suspected. My father had not properly administered the trust. The rental income had been commingled with family funds. There was a paper trail, but it would require forensic accounting to fully trace. The property itself was clearly mine. The income question was more complicated. But here's what she also told me. Because of Ohio trust law, and because I had documentation of my board certification date, I had strong grounds to demand a full accounting. And if that accounting showed what she already suspected it would show, I had grounds to pursue the recovery of misappropriated funds. I asked her how long this would take. She said, "That depends on how you want to play it." I asked her what she meant. She said, "You can move quickly and aggressively, or you can be patient. But I'll tell you this, Daniel, the more information you have before you make a move, the better your position will be. Be patient. Collect information. Document everything." It was like she'd read my operating manual. I told her I wanted to be patient. She said, "Good. Then let's start building your case." Over the next 4 months, I didn't say a word to my family. I went about my life. I performed surgeries. I mentored Renata. I had dinners with Marcus and the team after long shifts. I worked with Dr. Okafor on the research publications tied to our new center. I also met with Catherine every 2 weeks and watched the picture come into focus. The forensic accountant she brought in, a meticulous man named Harold Park who wore bow ties and spoke in precise, measured sentences, started tracing the rental income. What he found was not shocking to me by that point, but it was still difficult to see in black and white. Over 14 years, approximately $340,000 in rental income had passed through an account my father controlled. Most of it had been absorbed into general family finances. Some of it had gone directly to fund Garrett's business during his early struggling years. There were transfers, 3 of them, that appeared to have helped cover costs related to Colt's various ventures. None of it had been escrowed for me. None of it. Harold set it all out in a report that was 47 pages long. I read every page. And then I put the report in a folder, put the folder in a locked file box, and I waited. Because I knew something was coming. Something that I would need to be ready for. The invitation arrived on a Saturday. It was for my parents' 40th wedding anniversary party. My mom had been planning it for months. I knew this only because Priya had mentioned it in a group text that I was technically part of, but rarely contributed to. It was going to be held at the Linden Falls Country Club, which my dad had been a member of for years. 60 guests. A catered dinner. The whole thing. I hadn't been told directly. I'd been added to the digital invitation like an afterthought, 3 weeks before the event, after Priya had apparently asked my mom, "Did you invite Daniel?" I could picture that conversation. I RSVP'd yes. What I didn't tell anyone was that the Whitmore naming announcement was being formally publicized that same month. The local news had already picked it up. There was a piece in the regional business journal. The hospital had sent out press releases. My name was starting to appear in places. I knew it was only a matter of time before someone in Linden Falls saw it. I just didn't know who would see it first, or what would happen when they did. I arrived at the country club on a Friday evening in October, wearing a charcoal suit I'd bought for a medical conference 6 months earlier. I stood in the parking lot for a moment before going inside. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't nervous. I hadn't been in a room with my whole family in almost 2 years. I hadn't been in a room with my father since I'd received those trust documents. And the whole time I'd been building my legal case quietly, methodically, I had never once rehearsed what I would say to him when I saw him face to face. I walked in. The room was decorated beautifully. My mom had always had good taste. Round tables with white linens, candles, framed photos from my parents' 40 years together arranged on a display board near the entrance. I looked at those photos. I appeared in exactly 2 of them. In one, I was maybe 7 years old and largely obscured behind Garrett. In the other, I was at a family Christmas maybe 15 years ago, looking directly at the camera while everyone else looked at each other. Even in the photographs, I was in the room but not of it. My mom spotted me and waved me over. She looked happy, genuinely. She'd had her hair done, and she was wearing a blue dress I'd never seen before. She hugged me and said I looked thin and that I needed to eat more. Standard mom behavior. I hugged her back and said happy anniversary, and I meant it. Then Garrett found me. He was with his wife, Dana, and two men I didn't recognize who turned out to be business associates. He shook my hand with both of his, that politician handshake he'd perfected over years, and said, "Danny, you made it. Still saving lives over at the county clinic." The two men laughed. I smiled. "Something like that," I said. Dinner was served. Speeches were given. Garrett gave a long, emotional toast about my parents that was genuinely lovely and made my mom cry, and I'll give him that. He has always been gifted at making people feel seen. Priya spoke briefly, warmly. Colt made a joke that landed. My mom kept looking down the table at me with an expression I couldn't read. Something between guilt and relief, maybe. Like she was glad I was there, but wasn't sure what to do with me. My dad hadn't really spoken to me yet. He was holding court at the head table, surrounded by his contractor friends and club members, doing what he always did, being the patriarch of a room. Big handshake, bigger laugh. You'd never know his memory was slipping unless you watched carefully, and I was watching carefully. After dinner, during the dessert hour, he found me at the bar. He looked older, which I knew. I'd seen him at the hospital visit, but it still registered in a new way. He was 71. He looked 71. "Danny," he said. "Dad." He ordered a club soda. His cardiac health had him off alcohol now, which I knew from the medical records I'd reviewed because of course I'd reviewed them, and he stood next to me and looked out at the room. "You doing okay up there in Cleveland?" he said. "I'm at Whitmore, Dad. 20 miles from here." Right, he said. "The county place." I didn't correct him. I just nodded. "You seeing anyone?" he asked. "Not right now." "You should find someone," he said. "Your brother has a good life. A real life. You work too much." I sipped my drink. "Probably right," I said. And that was our conversation at my parents' 40th anniversary party. He walked back to his table and didn't look at me again for the rest of the night. It was 2 weeks after the party that things changed. Priya called me, which was unusual. Priya and I were probably the closest of my siblings, but that was a low bar and she didn't call often. She sounded strange. Careful. "Daniel," she said, "someone showed Mom a newspaper article." My pulse stayed even. "What article?" I said. "About your hospital. About a new building." She paused. "About your name on a building." There it was. "The Whitmore expansion announcement," I said. "It went out through the regional press." Silence. "Daniel," she said slowly, "it says you're a major donor. It says the wing is being named after you." "That's right." Another pause. "Mom she's upset." "Upset how?" "She says she didn't know. She says you never told them how. I mean, she's asking how you could afford to. She wants to know." I waited. "She wants to know why you didn't help the family if you had that kind of money." And there it was. The sentence I had been waiting for. The sentence that was really the whole point. Not pride. Not, "Daniel, we had no idea." Not, "We should have paid more attention." Just, "Why didn't you help us with your money?" "Tell her I'll come by for dinner this weekend," I said. "I think it's time we talked. I want to pause here and tell you what I was feeling because I think it matters." I wasn't angry the way I'd been angry years ago, sitting in that Italian restaurant watching Garrett order expensive wine with my $50,000 already in his account. That anger was hot and confused and hurt. What I felt now was something colder. Cleaner. Like the feeling just before a surgery when you've reviewed every image, every test, every file, and you know exactly what you're walking into and exactly what you're going to do. I called Catherine that afternoon. I told her we were entering the next phase. She told me she was ready. I also called Dr. Okafor and gave her a heads up that my personal situation might create some noise in the coming weeks. She listened and then said, "Daniel, you have done nothing wrong. This hospital stands behind you completely." I wrote that down in a notebook. Not because I doubted her, but because I wanted to remember how it felt to hear it. Then I called Paula. Paula said, "It's happening, isn't it?" I said, "It's happening." She said, "Call me after." Sunday dinner at my parents' house. My mom made pot roast, which she always made when she wanted something to feel normal. The table was set for 6, which meant Garrett was there, and Colt and Priya. Nobody had told me that. I walked in and found a full family gathering disguised as a quiet dinner. I sat down. My dad was at the head of the table. He looked like he hadn't slept well. We got through most of the meal with surface conversation. Garrett talked about a new contract he was bidding on. Colt complained about traffic. My mom asked Priya about her kids. Then Garrett put down his fork.
So, he said.
The hospital wing. I looked at him. What about it? How much did you put in? He said. For that to happen, it has to be significant. I took a sip of water. I'd rather not get into the specifics at dinner.
Danny.
My mom's voice. We're your family. I know that. Why didn't you tell us? She said. Why didn't you tell us you had that kind of money? You know what this family has been going through. You know how hard things have been. I've known things were hard, I said. I try to help when I could. Garrett made a sound. A small, dismissive sound. You tried to help, he repeated. Danny. I had to keep Dad's business alive with no support from you. And that sentence. Something shifted in the room. A temperature change. Barely perceptible. With no support, I said. You know what I mean, he said. You were off doing your thing, and the rest of us were here. I gave you $50,000, Garrett. Silence. 7 years ago, I said. 50,000. You never paid it back, and you told Mom I was threatening you when I asked about it. More silence. My mom looked between us. That was a loan. It was a gift, apparently, I said. I've made my peace with that. But let's not pretend I offered no support. That's different, Garrett said. That's old news. Right now, the family needs. What does the family need, Garrett? He straightened in his chair. We need help. Dad's memory is getting worse. The business needs capital. Mom needs. I want to talk about something else first, I said. I reached into my jacket pocket and set a document on the table. It was a single page. A summary page that Catherine had prepared, carefully worded, accurate in every detail. It described the existence of the trust, the rental property, the rental income, my father's role as executor, the 14 years, the amount. My mom picked it up first. She read it slowly. Her face changed. My dad sat very still. Garrett reached across and took the page from my mom. He read it twice. I watched his jaw tighten. What is this? He said. It's a summary of a trust that Grandma Edna established for me, I said. A trust that Dad knew about. A trust he was supposed to administer on my behalf. I looked at my father. He was looking at the tablecloth.
Dad, I said.
Did you know about this trust? He didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. Richard, my mom said quietly. It's complicated, he said. Finally.
Still not looking at me.
A forensic accountant has been through the records, I said. It's actually not that complicated. There's a building in downtown Linden Falls that belongs to me. Rental income from that building that should have been held for me. Over 14 years, roughly $340,000 was drawn from that account. My mom made a sound, like something physically hurt her. Colt was absolutely silent. Priya had both hands flat on the table. Danny, Garrett said.
His voice had changed.
The smoothness was still there, but there was something under it now. Danny, we need to talk about this as a family. Not like this. We're talking about it as a family, I said. I'm here. You're all here. Dad's not well, he said. You know that. You can't just ambush him with. I'm not ambushing anyone, I said. I'm telling you what I know. And what I know is that my grandmother left me something, and I never received it. And now I'd like to understand why. My dad finally looked up. He looked old and tired, and, underneath all of that, ashamed. The business was struggling, he said. Early on, before Garrett took over. We needed. So you used my inheritance to fund the family business. He didn't deny it. And then Garrett needed help, he continued. And the taxes on the property. Dad. I said it quietly. There are lawyers involved now. I'm telling you this not to hurt you. I'm telling you because this is real and it needs to be resolved. The room was very quiet. Garrett was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. It took me a moment to identify it. It was fear. The dinner ended without a resolution.
Of course it did.
These things don't resolve over pot roast on a Sunday. What happened over the following 3 weeks was a series of phone calls, some of them from Garrett, some from my mom, one from an attorney my father had apparently hired within 48 hours of that dinner. The attorney's name was Barry Hollis. He was 60, local, and had done work for my dad's business for years. He called me and introduced himself and suggested we could work something out quietly before this became a legal matter. I told him it was already a legal matter and gave him Catherine's number. My mom called me 4 times in the first week. The calls followed a progression. First she was hurt, then she was confused, then she was conciliatory, then she was angry. On the 4th call she told me that pursuing this would destroy the family and that my grandmother would not have wanted this. I thought about that. I thought about my grandmother slipping me $20 bills and calling me her serious one. I think Grandma would have wanted me to have what she left me, I said. My mom cried. I stayed on the phone until she stopped. Garrett never called me directly. He texted once. We need to handle this differently. Too many people could get hurt. I forwarded it to Catherine without responding. Priya called me after the 2nd week. She was the only one who didn't try to manage me or negotiate with me. She just asked, "Is this really happening, Daniel?" "Yes," I said. "Did Dad really do this?" "The documents show what they show."
She was quiet for a long time.
Then she said, "I always knew something was off. I just never knew what." That meant more to me than she probably realized. Catherine and Barry Hollis had 2 formal meetings over the following weeks. Harold Park's forensic report was submitted as evidence. The trust documentation, which had been sitting in a lawyer's filing cabinet for 14 years, legally intact, simply never disclosed to me, was verified and authenticated. Barry Hollis's position initially was that my father's actions were informal family financial management that had been necessary for the survival of the family business and therefore of the entire family, including me. Catherine's response was 32 pages long and included the phrase, breach of fiduciary duty, 11 times. After the 2nd meeting, Barry Hollis called Catherine with a settlement proposal. Catherine called me. The proposal was for my father to sign over the downtown Linden Falls property, the building itself, unencumbered, plus $200,000 in restitution for the rental income. They were acknowledging a shortfall of roughly $140,000, which Barry characterized as the portion that can be directly traced. Harold Park had traced nearly all of it. We made a counteroffer. I also asked Catherine to include one non-monetary condition. She raised an eyebrow at it, metaphorically speaking. We were on the phone, and asked if I was sure. I was sure. The condition was this: a formal, written acknowledgement from my father and from Garrett, because Garrett had benefited directly from funds intended for me, that the trust had existed, that they had known about it, and that the money had been used without my knowledge or consent. In writing.
Signed.
Not buried in legal language. Plain English. Barry Hollis pushed back hard on this. He said it was unnecessary. He said the financial settlement should be sufficient. He said my father was an elderly man with health concerns, and this kind of document was humiliating. I told Catherine to tell him, the document or we go to court. We got the document. I want to tell you about the day the Whitmore Cardiothoracic Center officially opened. It was a November morning, cold and clear. The kind of Ohio November day that feels like the world has been scrubbed clean overnight. There was a ceremony in the hospital atrium. About 200 people, local press, hospital board members, donors, staff, patients, and their families. Dr. Okafor gave a speech that made people cry.
She talked about what it meant to build something lasting.
About how the best doctors weren't just skilled, they were committed. She said, the name on this wing belongs to someone who understood before most people do that medicine is not a career. It is a calling and a covenant. I don't usually let things land like that. That one landed. Then they unveiled the sign. The Daniel R. Marsh Cardiothoracic Center. In letters that you could read from the parking lot. I stood there looking at it, and I thought about a lot of things. I thought about the bus rides to Ohio State. I thought about cleaning equipment at the research lab for minimum wage. I thought about the phone call where my mom asked if the other hospital had better parking. And then I thought about something I hadn't expected to think about. I thought about my grandmother. She used to call me her serious one. She used to slip me $20. She bought a building in 1974 and left it to me in a trust because she believed I would do something with it. She saw something in me that no one else in my family bothered to look for. I looked at my name on the side of that building. I got the last laugh, Grandma, I said out loud. The person standing next to me, a hospital board member I didn't know well, looked at me strangely. I didn't explain. My family came to the ceremony. I had not invited them. Somehow they found out. I imagine the local newspaper or someone in Linden Falls who knew someone at Whitmore, and they came. All four of them. My mom, my dad, Garrett, and Colt. Even Priya, who drove up from Columbus. I saw them from across the atrium during the reception. My mom looked like she was trying to figure out how to feel. My dad looked diminished, somehow, in a way that was hard to watch even now. Garrett stood with his arms crossed, wearing a contractor's jacket, looking at the sign on the wall with an expression I'll never fully decode.
Colt was on his phone.
Priya found me first. She hugged me and whispered, "I'm proud of you." I believed her. Then my mom found me. She took both my hands in hers and looked at me for a long moment. Her eyes were bright. She said, "Daniel." Just my name, like she was seeing me for the first time.
"Hi, Mom," I said.
"Why didn't you ever tell us?" she said. And I knew she didn't mean about the wing. She meant all of it. Why didn't I tell them I was building something? Why didn't I fight for their attention? Why did I let myself stay invisible for so long? "You never asked," I said. She didn't have an answer for that. My dad approached. He moved slower than I remembered. He looked at the sign on the wall for a long time, and then he looked at me. His eyes were wet. Not crying exactly. Just wet. "Your grandmother always said," he started, and then he stopped. I waited. "She always said you were the one," he said. I don't know why He stopped again. I made a decision in that moment. Not a legal one. A human one. "Dad," I said quietly, "I know you weren't trying to hurt me. I know things got complicated and you made choices and they snowballed. I know that." I paused. "But you need to understand that those choices had a cost. Not just financial." He nodded slowly. I don't know how much of it truly landed, given where his cognition was. But I said it, and he heard it, and that was what I needed. Garrett found me at the end of the reception. Dana wasn't with him. He stood in front of me with his hands in his pockets, which was the least Garrett posture I'd ever seen from him. He looked at the floor first, then at me. "I should have paid you back," he said. "The $50,000. "Yes," I said. "You should have." "I told myself we'd get to it," he said. "I convinced myself it was okay, because you were," he paused. "Because I figured you were fine." "You figured I was fine because you weren't looking," I said. "There's a difference." He nodded. Neither of us said anything for a moment. "The acknowledgement letter," he said. "That you required." He exhaled. "That was smart. I didn't expect that." "I know," I said. "What are you going to do with the building?" I smiled at that. Not meanly. "I haven't fully decided. But I've had some conversations about turning it into a community health clinic. Affordable care for people who can't access what we have here." Something moved across Garrett's face. Reluctant respect, maybe. Or the recognition of something he couldn't quite name. "That's a good use," he said. "Yeah," I said. "I think Grandma would agree." He left without shaking my hand, and I let that be what it was. The settlement was finalized in December. The property was transferred to my name. The restitution payment was structured over 3 years to avoid putting my parents in genuine financial hardship. Catherine had advised aggressive pursuit of the full amount, but I made the choice to extend the timeline. Not out of weakness. Out of the simple fact that I didn't want my elderly parents to lose their home. Barry Hollis seemed genuinely surprised by that. I think he'd been expecting a different version of me. The vindictive son. The one who'd been ignored for years and was now swinging a sledgehammer. That was never what I wanted. I wanted the truth in the open. I wanted what was mine. I wanted acknowledgement. I got all three. The signed acknowledgement letter is framed in my home office. I don't look at it often. It's not a trophy. It's just a document that says, "This happened and we know it happened and we're on record about it." That's all I ever needed. The community clinic idea didn't stay an idea for long. Paula helped me structure the financing. Dr. Okafor provided medical oversight guidance. Renata, my former med student, who by then had finished her own residency, agreed to be the clinic's first staff physician. We called it the Edna Marsh Community Health Center. It opened the following September. On the opening day, there was a small ceremony, much smaller than the Whitmore event. A ribbon cutting in front of a building that had once generated rental income my father quietly appropriated, and was now going to provide free or low-cost cardiac screenings and preventive care to people who needed it. The mayor came. The local paper sent a photographer. Priya was there. She brought her kids. My mom was there. She stood next to me during the ribbon cutting and didn't say very much, but she held my arm the entire time. My dad didn't come. His memory had declined enough by then that large gatherings were disorienting. But Priya told me later that she'd shown him photos, and he'd looked at them for a long time, and then he'd said, "That's Danny's place."
Just that.
"That's Danny's place."
Priya said, "Yeah, Dad."
"That's Danny's place." He nodded. "Good," he said.
Good.
I'm not going to pretend that fixed everything. It didn't. 14 years of rental income doesn't come back. Those Sunday dinners where my name wasn't in the toast don't get unmade. The $50,000 that Garrett spent and then made me apologize for asking about doesn't disappear. The years of being the invisible one, the serious one, the one nobody thought to look at too carefully, those years happened. But you know what else happened? I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon with a wing named after me. I own a building my grandmother always believed should be mine. I run a clinic that helped 412 patients in its first 6 months. And somewhere in Linden Falls there is a signed document in which my father and my brother acknowledged in plain English that they knew what they had done, and they did it anyway. My grandmother used to say the serious ones always got the last laugh. I'm not laughing exactly, but I'm smiling. And this time everyone in the room can see it. The Daniel R. Marsh Cardiothoracic Center at Whitmore General Hospital performed its 2000 successful procedure 18 months after opening. The Edna Marsh Community Health Center expanded to a second location the following year. Daniel still drives a modest car and eats like a grad student, by choice. He says he likes remembering where he came from,